Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today I'm talking about the extremely underrated but very awesome Turrican franchise, video game franchise. If you've never heard of Turrican, I don't blame you, because it's a retro video game franchise that for whatever reason has basically died. And I don't even know who has the rights to it and why they're not doing anything with it. So the first Turrican originally was designed basically as a Metroid type clone for the Commodore 64. It was a big open world type 2D platformer. I say open world. It's not. I mean, I know that's not really the correct word or the word we would have used back then, but it's a big game. It has huge levels that you get to explore. With some levels have mini bosses that are optional, and there's hidden treasures and things spread throughout. Now, there's usually only one exit in the game, but there's multiple paths to get there. The game has it is somewhat similar in some ways to Metroid. Your character is a guy this time instead of a girl, in a robotic suit, and he can roll up in a ball. Only this time the ball has spikes on it and can attack enemies. And he has power-ups. He has a main weapon, which is just like a laser gun, like a regular shotgun, or just gun, that shoots bullets. He can upgrade it to a multi-shot that sprays bullets, or a laser weapon that's more powerful. He has a fire beam that comes out of his arm that you can rotate around the screen that can attack enemies, reveal hidden blocks, or delete breakable blocks. He has two moves, run and jump, so it is kind of like a run and gun type platformer. And then he can also, when he's kneeling, excuse me, he can place mines that will destroy enemies that are on the ground. He has a wave fire weapon that shoots an energy wave across the screen. Excuse me. That wipes out all the enemies on the screen. And then he has like a grenade that if you shoot it at an object and it hits an object, it'll blow up everything on the screen. And aside, your primary goal obviously is to survive the level and get to the end and beat the boss. Your secondary goal, like a lot of games at the time, platformers, etc., especially, it is to collect the little, I guess they're gems, is what they're called, and the gems have a different look on every level. They look different every level. And you can also, of course, collect extra lives. And like a lot of games of the time, especially the 2D side-scrolling type games, the levels have a timer that you have to beat, and you have an energy bar. So it's a pretty fun game. There's a good variety in the levels. They're very futuristic, sci-fi themed. You know, you've got mostly side-scrolling levels, but you have some underwater levels where you do some swimming. You have a floating level where you have a jetpack and you're floating around shooting things while you're in the air. You have outdoor level where you're trying to get into the base. You have levels inside the base. You have a level that is very much inspired by the movie Alien, or the Alien franchise. And then you have the final boss. Now, each level, what makes the bosses unique in this game is they take up almost the whole screen, and they're very difficult. And the game also has some really fun 8-bit music for the time. Again, it was originally released and designed for the Commodore 64. I do believe there is an 8-bit NES port, and there's also an 8-bit TurboGrafx 16 port available. And then there's a 16-bit Sega Genesis port, which is the one I grew up with. Excuse me. Basically, any version of the game is good. Now, there were sort of 2 or 3 sequels depending on which platform you're on. And it's complicated. The first sequel, Turrican 2, was also ported to some of the 8-bit consoles. I believe it was on the NES as well. And it was sort of ported to the Sega Genesis, and I say sort of because it was actually turned into a licensed game based on the movie Universal Soldier. So there's a game on the Sega Genesis called Universal Soldier that is not a Universal Soldier video game. It's actually just Turrican 2 reskinned. I believe Turrican 2, instead of being on the Commodore 64, was actually on the Amiga, as was Turrican 3. Turrican 3 was ported to both 16-bit systems, but it was given different ports on different systems. Turrican 3 was ported to the Genesis as Mega Turrican, with mostly the same levels from the Amiga port, and then it was ported to the Super Nintendo as 2 games with different levels. Some levels that are available in the Genesis version, but new levels that aren't in the Genesis version, and they're both called Super Turrican and Super Turrican 2. Unfortunately, that's it. That's where the franchise died. There was supposed to be a 3D game for the GameCube called, I believe, Hurricane or something like that, if I remember correctly. Or Turrican Hurricane or something like that. Something weird like that. The games were ported to consoles by Factor 5, and Factor 5 had a really good relationship with Nintendo at the time, and were porting games to the GameCube quite a bit. I don't really know what happened, why the game was canceled. I don't know what happened to Factor 5, and I don't know who owns the rights to Turrican today, and why we don't have any ports or modern releases of the game, or any of the games, which is weird. So, that's confusing. Now, Turrican 2 is more or less just Turrican, with different levels, just new levels. Basically the same game. Now, Turrican 3, whether you're playing it on the Genesis as Mega Turrican or Super Nintendo as Super Turrican 1 or 2, mixes up the game quite a bit. One, it really overhauled the graphics, taking advantage of the additional horsepower you get on the 16-bit consoles. And 2, well, it also overhauled the music considerably. Way better music on those versions. But it also overhauled the gameplay. You still have the basic run and gun. You have jumping. Your arm fire whip, I guess we'll call it, has been replaced by a weapon kind of like a hookshot type weapon that you can shoot at blocks or ceilings or objects and use it to swing across things to get around the levels easier in some ways. You still have the ball you can roll up in, and you still have power-ups. You have 3 power-ups this time to your weapon. You still have the laser, you still have the scatter shot, or multiple as it's called, but you also have a new one called Rebound, which shoots like a energy orb, and then it also shoots these 2 I guess, blobs, one that shoots up and one that shoots down, and they hit a surface, whether it be the ceiling or the floor, and they just sort of bounce along the surface until they hit enemies. Now, one thing that is different is you no longer have the grenade that you shoot at the wall or the mines that you place on the ground. Instead, what you have are three, basically, I don't know what they're called, but they're like super weapons that shoots a big ring of energy across the screen that wipes out everything on the screen. Now, this energy weapon you get 3 of every level, or excuse me, every life. So, you get to use it 3 times. You cannot refill it or collect extras. And then once it's gone until you die again, and then you get it back. And then, like the other Turrican games, you're still collecting gems and trying to beat the bosses. Now, Turrican 1 and 2 are, I will say, next to impossible to beat without the cheat code. They're incredibly difficult. They're beyond NES hard, which they really weren't made for the NES. They're Commodore 64 games that were available on other platforms. But they're extremely hard. They're harder than you're used to. Mega Turrican and its counterpart Super Turrican, as well as Turrican 3, aren't nearly as hard. The bosses are a little easier. The levels are a little easier. Still very sci-fi themed. Your enemies are mostly robots. And they have various designs. Very interesting, very cool game. I don't understand why there's no Turrican games today. It frustrates me, annoys me, and disappoints me. Whoever owns the rights to Turrican and keeping it hostage needs to get their shit together and get us a new Turrican game. Stay cool.